Usually at events like this, we wait till the end to thank people for their contributions. But I'd like to begin by thanking a number of folks, some of whom you may have met, some of whom you may not have met yet, all of whom are important to you. The members of the Diversity Committee all work very hard with you and for you to create the kind of experience that we hope you'll enjoy this afternoon. And I just want to take a moment to mention them by name and to thank them for their creativity and their support of this important initiative. Alberto Gadenzi, the Dean, serves on the committee. So does Ruth McCroy, Susan Coleman, Liz Cinquino, Kevin Mahoney, Susan Tone, and Bill Howard. Bill Keeney is here, who served for a number of years. We also have a student representative on the Diversity Committee. This year it's Ann Fletcher, who's in her final year and is concentrating on older adults and families. We have a number of partners as well who, although not on the committee formally, work with us all the time. Susan Callahan is in the back of the room. Charisse Ange, who work in our communications and marketing department. Serena Hertz in the Dean's office is invaluable to us, as is Joy Velarde. And last but not least, there are a number of student diversity groups that you may have heard about. You may have already started to make contact with student leaders. But all of those student leaders from all of the student diversity groups are partners with us in shaping the programs, events, and the conversations that we have. So thank you, one and all. My name is Paul Klein. I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Diversity Committee here in the Graduate School of Social Work. Now, in the last week, you've received many messages of welcome. And we want to add ours to those many messages. And we welcome you in particular to enter into this school's conversation about diversity, one of the most important conversations that we have. It's a conversation that has been ongoing since the day of the school's founding, over 75 years ago. And like all conversations among good friends, sometimes our conversations about diversity are fiery, and sometimes they're subdued. Sometimes our conversations are shallow. Sometimes they're quite deep. At all times, however, this conversation has been committed to one simple but vital goal: to open our minds and our hearts to better serve all people. And today it's our privilege to invite you into this conversation and to let you know that this invitation begins today and never ends. We hope you'll continue to participate in this conversation throughout your time with us and after you leave as alumni. We invite you to bring into this conversation your silence and your voice, your questions and your wisdom. Now, many of us who have been engaged in this conversation for some time entered the conversation believing that our hearts and our minds were already wide open. We saw nothing in us that was evidence of intolerance or prejudice. We knew that our intentions were good. We knew that our desire to be just and to serve the cause of justice was strong. Entering this conversation, many of us have discovered that the conversation is warm and welcoming, and we discovered that the friends and colleagues who waited for us in this conversation were eager to affirm that we were, in fact, good people with good hearts. And we wish to affirm that for you. We know you already to be good people with good hearts. And in the safety and warm goodwill of this conversation, many of us have discovered that sometimes our way of seeing the world and sometimes our way of seeing other people had, in fact, been shaped by attitudes and beliefs and fears that were, in fact, oppressive. We discovered that sometimes our best intentions were undone by our way of seeing. Now, our ongoing diversity conversation covers many topics and asks many questions, but the conversation rests on one simple and necessary promise: to teach and learn from one another always without fear and with respect and with warm goodwill. And by making and keeping that promise to each other, we give each other a most precious gift, the opportunity to see how we see. And if we are humble, and if we are wise, to change how we see. Now, often we welcome voices from outside the borders of the School of Social Work to join our diversity conversation, and Tiziana Dearing was one of those outside voices we were most eager to bring inside. As president and treasurer of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Boston, and as the CEO of Boston Rising, a startup anti-poverty fund dedicated to breaking the generational cycle of poverty in Boston's neighborhoods, Tiziana has been a reliable and unwavering voice, speaking and sometimes shouting out against the causes of injustice that undermine the freedom and the well-being and potential of people and communities. She works with us now full-time as an inside voice, as associate professor and co-chair of the macro practice. Please join me in welcoming Tiziana Dearing.
How are you? Everyone doing all right? Good. Sustained, got some good food? Okay, because as I talk to you, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot a couple of times. Let me prepare you now. I'm going to ask you some questions, and they will not be easy ones, but they are ones that I have confronted in my work before, and I thought it would be interesting to give you an opportunity to practice on those questions a little bit too. So while this is largely a talk over the next half an hour, I am going to invite you more than once to brainstorm with me a little bit. It's incredibly exciting to me to be talking about social justice. I find it more inspiring, exciting, and wonderful to think about than pretty much anything else I've done in my professional career. If I could talk about it all day, every day, I would. I'm not sure I'm good at talking about it, but I like to, and I like to think about it. And I'm assuming that most of you will be talking about social justice in your Basics of Macro class this week. Is that right? Help me out with good-sized nods or shakes so I know. Okay. All right. So you're going to get a second dose of this. And I'm not going to focus on the question of aging deliberately in my section. I'm really going to focus on a few basics about social justice through story and through examples, a little bit less through this is what right relationships and distributive justice are. You can spend some more time on that with your professors in class. But I do believe that social justice is the root of the calling for my work my entire life. I think it is the most important and right now most absent guiding principle in the way we make decisions collectively, in the way that we make policy decisions, in the way that we decide who gets what in our society. And it's part of the reason that I fell in love with the practice of social work as a non-social worker myself, because it turned out there was an entire profession out there who got to have social justice be the basis of what they do, be the basis of their calling, be the basis of their work. And I think that's an incredibly privileged and inspiring place to occupy in the world. And I am humbled by people who choose to dedicate themselves to that year over year in there. So I'm going to start with a story. I'm going to tell you a story about a situation that I confronted when I was running Catholic Charities. And then before I tell you what I did, I'm going to ask you to think about what you would do, okay? And you're not going to like answering it because you're going to have to disappoint or upset somebody to answer it. But I'm asking at least one or two of you to be brave enough to venture a little bit of a thought or an answer to the group. Because in reality, when you're in a leadership position, you have to make decisions like that a lot, whether it's one that you would particularly welcome or not. Think about your congresspeople and the decision about Syria right now, for example. You don't always get to not take a public position on difficult questions of justice, all right? When I was running Catholic Charities, I came in just before the economic crisis. And unless you ran an organization or lived through that time, it is almost impossible to explain to you the giant hemorrhaging of money, confidence, and support, especially for anti-poverty work that happened in that couple of years afterward. People were panicked, terrified, the money was going away, all right? And we were coming into a new budget year with shortfalls in two programs. The first was an adult day health program that we ran in South Boston out of our La Brea Center. And that adult day program was largely for elders who could not live alone or be left alone during the day, but also for some community members, none of whom happened to be below the age of 50, although we didn't have an age restriction for this second group, but with severe developmental disabilities. The families of those members of our adult day health program relied on us to provide that daily support and care. They didn't have other good options. They had to work. They had other kids to take care of. They had things they had to do. And we were committed to providing a very high level quality of care and support in a way that was truly affordable for families. We had a second program. It was an overnight shelter for single homeless women. It was the only shelter of that kind that we ran. It's Somerville, Massachusetts. It was the kind where you line up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and if you can get a bed, you have a bed with us for the night. Although we had a couple of rooms on the second floor for women who had been able to achieve some level of stability, maybe needed a post office box, a place to store a couple of outfits of work clothes because they were beginning to find some stable work and needed a transition into permanent housing and permanent financial stability. So here's the thing. They were both going to experience deficit shortfalls. And I was going to have to find a way to pay for them. And I couldn't pay for them both. And I had to shut one down. So I could either pick the seniors with developmental disabilities, or I could pick homeless women. Those were my options, and I had to shut one down because there wasn't enough money to backfill both. And keep in mind that whichever one I shut down, the constituents and users of the other program were going to think that I understood nothing about what was important to them, was completely uncommitted to them, to their families, to that community, and was the cruelest thing that they had ever encountered. I guarantee you that was what the group I shut down was going to feel like. So what do you do? What do you do? How do you think about the decision you have to make in that case? What's something that you have to think about in that case? Somebody be gutsy. Give it a shot. Rebecca.
I think one of my first steps would be assessing, based on the population, based on the needs, if there were other resources, other organizations and agencies that could take on that load, or
Yeah.
if there were any other resources that they could access, or if this would be only a place in that community where that would go.
So Rebecca said she would try to assess availability of other resources, other programs, other service opportunities for the people in the programs that I had to consider shutting down. That's a great answer. How about another one? Hi, what's your name? No, you're at the, oh, you're passing the mic. Okay, right here.
I would make sure that their basic needs are being met first, so I'm not sure, but I guess right now I'd be leaning towards the homeless women.
Yep. So first, good for you for making a stake, right? For thinking about it and saying, I think I want to try to have an opinion on this. And what you are arguing is we've got to think about what we would call Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we've got to start with basic needs first. And the calling is first to provide for the basic needs, and then other needs come later. So you kind of got to double down on the homeless shelter because of where it fits in that hierarchy of needs. What other things might you think about? Anybody else want to take a position? Hi. Nice and loud. I think we'll be able to do it without the mic. Thanks. If you can stay in that area, though, that would be great.
One factor might be just how many people are in each one. If one has 5 people versus one has 60 people, then that might be an important thing to take into account.
So the numbers, right, which is and probably not, you were probably not coming from a utilitarian perspective there, but that's a bit of a utilitarian question and a very legitimate one. How many people are we talking about? Because if it's 2 on one hand and 500 on the other, instinctively we think that's probably going to make this decision a little bit easier than if it's 50 and 48, right? So how many people are we talking about? Who else? Here. And then here. I saw another hand over here. Go ahead.
Maybe how much of my budget goes to each program, and unfortunately the one that requires fewer resources is the one that gets shut down, and what remains goes to my other programs to help better the community overall.
So what's the nut is the question I would have asked my finance officer, right? What's the nut? How much money are we talking about? What else can we do with that money? It's not like I had walking around money available, right? We were deficit spending all over the place and struggling to raise anything. So any money that I spent to fill a gap on a program wasn't going to something else. That's right. We're going to take 2 more. I love it that you're so, oh my God, we're going to take 4 more. But no other hands after that, okay? 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay? Go ahead.
I guess kind of combining what people have said, I think I was thinking in kind of a utilitarian perspective that you have to think about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So what's going to happen to, like, if it's winter and you're closing the homeless shelter, are these women going to potentially die? Are they going to really be in a great threat physically? And that goes back to the basic needs versus, I don't know about the day program, but maybe they're going to be a little bit safer than out on the streets in the winter.
So the real question of what's the quantity and quality of the damage you're going to do, right? What's the damage? What's the damage? We had 3 more. They were all over here, right? Weren't they? 1, 2. Oh, shoot. I forgot my third person. Thank you. Right there.
Similar to the first question, I would try and take an inventory of the existing relationships I had with community partners and stakeholders to understand who is going to help make this decision and help me understand the implications of the decision.
Oh my gosh, you want community involvement in the decision? That's an incredible thought. So what do other people think, right? Now, that is an interesting one, John, because on the one hand, one should always involve community in the decision. On the other hand, figuring out how to get community voices in a situation where the parties are so interested and the options are so limited, right? This was a binary choice. I could do one or I could do the other. And there were going to be very few people who were family members of participants in our adult day health program who were going to say, you know what, you should keep the shelter, right? That doesn't mean there were none. How many of you have ever seen one of my all-time favorite movies, Batman: The Dark Knight, where you have to, the 2 people on the 2 boats, and they have to pick, right, who's going to die, and everybody's convinced they're going to blow each other up, and in the end they don't, right? So it's an argument for your case, John, or a case for your argument. I think it's the other way around. All right, we got a couple more. Go ahead.
I didn't realize it was so loud. I think going back to what Rebecca said, definitely trying to locate like the constituents, trying to find another program and find them and kind of move them toward the other program so that you can make sure that their needs are met.
Yep.
But still not have to kind of unfortunately fund them anymore.
Yeah. And one more here.
What I was going to say, but just how much these programs are making a difference.
Yes.
And just seeing, what are people getting out of these and where are they going from there and just how well they're working too.
That's interesting. I would argue you did not say something that everybody else has already said, because your question was which one's the more effective program, right? Let's look at impact. Is one of these, let's say, a state-of-the-art program that's producing results that are a standard deviation better than we're seeing in similar kinds of programs, versus the other one is, no disrespect, but run-of-the-mill? And would you think about those things as well? So fantastic answers, and they run the gamut, and from utilitarian questions to quality questions to availability of funds, very pragmatic financial questions, and a host of things in between. So in the end, I closed the adult day health program. The criteria that I used, the main ones, there were many over time as we debated this, but the criteria that I used were roughly availability of other services, vulnerability of the population, almost in that Maslow's space, right? Overall cost of continuing, what can I do with that dollar versus something else that I can do with that dollar, and the likelihood that the program could survive the next round too, right? I would have argued, by the way, that they were comparable in their outcome impact, right? But that is another one we have to think about, and it's a really pragmatic. None of this feels like really deep moral philosophical thinking, right? It doesn't feel like, it was, okay, next year when this happens again, if I'm pretty sure this one's going to get cut out at the knees a second time around, then I'm just stanching the bleeding for a year and I'm going to be facing this problem again. Versus, where I think I might be able to keep it alive. The Adult Day Health Program, we had a reduction in per head reimbursement from state contracts. It was very clear that was going to happen again. With the homeless shelter, it was private funding that we had lost, and my sense was, one, that we could raise more private funding over time, and two, there were zero alternatives for this population of women. There were other, in the end, every single one of the participants in our Adult Day Health Program within 2 months was in another program, right? Not going to be the case with the homeless shelter. Just wasn't. It just wasn't going to be the case. So that is a very pragmatic example of 3 things that I want you to think about as you think about social justice. And again, you're going to have an opportunity to learn the core principles of social justice from a legal perspective, from a Catholic perspective, from a social work perspective. But when it comes into actual play, none of it's that clean, right? There's some utilitarian consideration. There's some egalitarian consideration, right? There wasn't really much of a libertarian consideration in this case, but there are competing demands and competing criteria. But what happened in this situation was, one, at the end of the day, the social contract was no longer able to provide for a population of people who needed it. 2, we had real, tough, unfortunate, and unpleasant choices to make about what we could do. And we had a series of social justice questions that pitted one group of people who deserve our compassion and our support because they are vulnerable and marginalized against another group of people who deserved our compassion and support because they are, say it with me, vulnerable and marginalized, right? And that is where the rubber meets the road on questions of how you make justice work and bring justice into consideration along with all of the other considerations that you are obligated to keep track of, even if they're not a piece of the moral code, right? I had a fiduciary responsibility to the bottom line of that organization at the end of the day, okay? Because I needed to make sure, it was around 100 years before me. I was not going to be the girl where on my watch, it wasn't going to be around in the years after, right? That's a social justice dimension too. Who's ever heard live to fight another day, right? Live to fight another day. So, does that help you get a sense of how a practical experience will bring you into contact with questions of social justice and with decisions about how you choose between vulnerable populations for which society is not stepping up? Does that give you a sense of that? I need to check my stopwatch. Oh, so it turns out your iPhone will still shut down and make you put in a passcode. If you're using your stopwatch, you can tell I don't use it very often. That brings me to the question of the social contract, which I only want to talk about for a minute. I'm not going to spend too much time in theory today because I want to get into another case example with you, which is a different one, and it's based on race and poverty. But I do want to say that I do believe that social justice and the social contract go hand in hand. Who wants to tell me what they think the social contract is? I know, not fair. You just ate. It's not a test. But who wants to tell me what you think the social contract is? Not in fancy terms. Anybody? Go ahead. Hi, what's your name?
Chelsea.
Hi, Chelsea. Go ahead.
All right, so social contract, I think it's when people enter into society together, they have to go. Okay.
People enter into society, they have to give up some individual rights in order to gain some of the public social benefits of that society.
So give that girl a cookie. It's the trade-off that we make between our individual rights and what we agree to do for and with each other when we come together as a society and we make that trade-off. I like that one. I'd love to hear another one. Hi, go ahead. What's your name?
Eric.
Hi, Eric. Go ahead. Eric gets a cookie too. Yes, it is. It's a societal commitment that we make to take care of each other. The alternative, and I think it was Rousseau who said this, is that life can be nasty, brutish, and short, right? When I really try to explain it to like my 8-year-old, I would say to him, the deal we make with each other about what we can rely on each other for and who's going to be responsible for what, all right? Now, social justice, as written social work, calls us to be particularly careful in the social contract that we care for those and support those who have been marginalized or made vulnerable by unjust systems, practices, economies, relationships, cultures, theories, beliefs. And one of the things that makes me panicky about a citizen in a democratic society today is it really feels like we've lost a hold of the questions of social justice, about that preference for those who are made vulnerable in the way that we think about solving our problems and providing. And we've gotten to a point that feels fairly libertarian to me, or maybe market-driven is better than libertarian in this, that says, I got mine, that's my job, I got to hold on to it, I'm all good, right? I got mine, I'm all good, right? Good luck getting yours. That is not a social contract very much, A. And B, it's certainly not one that takes justice principles and the question of the poor and the marginalized into account. But you are the keepers of that trust. You are the ones who are choosing to educate yourselves to become people in society who say, wait a minute, that's not good enough. You got yours, who were maybe privileged with better social networks, maybe privileged with the community you were born into, maybe privileged with the family you were born into, maybe privileged with a savings account somebody else didn't have, maybe privileged by your race, by your gender, by your moral code in the environment that you were in. There are 8,000 ways to get a leg up. And for every way there is to get a leg up, there's somebody else who didn't get it, right? And you are the keepers of the trust that say, we can turn that on its head. We can bend this thing around. We can bend this like Beckham, right? We can bend this. Who's a tennis fan? I'm a tennis fan. Any tennis fans? Okay. Rafael Nadal does this thing with his forehand, and his arm kind of winds up over here afterward. And the ball bends. It's incredible. No one, I can't believe anybody ever beats him. It bends. It starts this way, and it comes all the way around and lands over here. It's got so much spin. We are the masters of that spin, right? We bend the ball for people. That's what we do. So I'm going to give you an example of bending the ball for people who were economically disadvantaged and black, all right? At Boston Rising, our mission was to find new ways to break the generational cycle of poverty in urban neighborhoods. One of the things that we realized was core to the system of poverty was power and control. Power and control. Power and control of resources was never in the hands of people who were experiencing poverty, and in fact, quite the opposite, systematically disenfranchised from either access to power and control, and over time, generation after generation, expectations of power and control. Does that make sense? We were working in our first neighborhood in a neighborhood called Grove Hall, which is in Roxbury and a little bit of Dorchester. Largely African American neighborhood, about 85%. Roughly a 10 to 12% Hispanic population and a small but growing African population, all right? And we were going to do new forms of philanthropy that were going to try to break that generational cycle of poverty. The second thing we realized is that inherent in our system's belief about people who are experiencing poverty is that they're stupid, they're lazy, and they don't want the same things that everybody else on the planet wants, okay? We assume, systemically, we assume that people who are in poverty secretly belong to be there, aren't smart enough to get out, are there because they're lazy, and can't make good decisions. Now, I will hopefully not say anything else that offensive any time in the month of September, okay? But that's the truth about how we believe, about what we believe about poverty. And it doubles down when you're talking about race and poverty. Just double all of it when you're talking about race and poverty. So if we were going to go at philanthropy, sticking with the traditional system of, I'm going to pick something that I, who have wealth knowledge, thinks works because I'm smart enough to know, and people who are in poverty weren't smart enough to make good decisions, so they couldn't possibly know. I'm going to invest my money that way, and if I'm pleased with the outcomes, we're going to call that success. If I'm pleased with the outcomes, we're going to call that success. So our lead donor was gutsy enough to let us do this, although we scared the pants off of him in doing this. And it was like watching a guy on the front end of a roller coaster the entire time. We sequestered $250,000, went to the community and said, we'd like to build a community board strictly of residents and business owners in this neighborhood. And we are going to give you complete control of this $250,000 to do your own grant making. You decide how much you're going to give every year. You decide what your criteria is. You decide what the size of the grant is. You decide who the target population is. We're going to get out of it. We're out. We'll help you with what you ask for at the beginning, but this is true community philanthropy. This blew everything up. In the community, they didn't believe us at first. They kept saying, no, you're just going to take it back. You're not really going to do this. We've seen this 100 times. You tell us we're going to have control, but at the end of the day, if you don't like what we do, you're going to take it back. So we worked to give them an independent 501c3 with complete control of the money, right? People in the money community went nuts. They hated it. Where's the accountability? Well, the accountability is between the trust and the people for whom the money is intended. We don't think the community will hold people accountable for making responsible decisions. Do you not hold your local school board accountable? Do you not hold your Chamber of Commerce accountable? Do you not hold the land trusts in your community accountable? People said, well, you're giving up control of the money. Exactly. For once in our lives, we're going to give up control of the money to people who need the money. How is this such a crazy thing? You give up control. Well, they can't make good decisions. I'm sorry, what? What did you just say? Really think about that. What did you just say? Oh, I'm sorry. So you think that people who have less money don't want a better future for their children? You think that people who have less money don't want to take care of themselves? How many people do you know in your personal life who actually don't want to work, feel self-independent, have a sense of self-agency, do things for themselves and their families? How many of you? Exactly. I used to say in my speeches when I ran Catholic Charities, the laziness curve totally exists, and it is equally distributed across the population, right? Equally distributed. I'll give you 10%, but they're not, it's not all down in the poverty end. I got a lot of guys playing video games in their parents' basements who will tell you otherwise, right? Equally distributed across the population, but we make unjust assumptions based on people's status, right? In the end, the Grove Hall Trust did brilliant things. They're continuing to do brilliant things. We've created a population of people who now know governance, right? Now are responsible for administering the investment of $250,000, who created this brilliant little $600 at a time thing with local residents, not organizations, local residents who know what they need in their neighborhood. Subsidiarity pushed all the way down, right? Not based on believing people can't make decisions, not based on believing they can't handle their money, not based on thinking that they don't want the same things, but based on belief that people fundamentally want to rise. And the first and foremost, we have to stop prioritizing the dollar over the person and give them control and the opportunity to do so. Does that make sense? Do I need to connect the dots for you back to social justice on that question? Or are we good? Because I got 3 minutes. So are we good? Okay, all right. So listen, there was, of course, lots more that I wanted to say. Those of you who are students of mine, this is going to become a familiar pattern, so you can get used to it now. So far, I've given you a case story that is a question of what we prioritize, That was the case with Catholic Charities. What are we going to prioritize? Is it number of people? Is it quality? Is it availability of services? Is it Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Is it what else we can do with the money? All of those are social justice questions. The second case that I gave you was a question of who we were going to prioritize. And if I could stomp out one idea for the rest of my career in the social justice space, it would be our love affair with our dollar's outcome versus our people's outcome. I believe the nonprofit capital markets are completely broken, and that tail wags that dog like I have never seen before. And that we are so far gone into market principles that our only available definitions of ROI have to do with how people feel about what happened to their dollar versus what happened to the person that dollar was supposed to go to support. To me, that is one of the fundamental justice questions that you will encounter if you work in the nonprofit or government space at any point in your career. Now that's a little narrow for the closing of a speech, so I'll broaden it back out for us just a tiny bit. But I'm telling you, 10 years into this, raising money right and left, trying to make organizations work, if I could fix one thing, that would be the one. Because I think it kills creativity, and I think it keeps power structures in place that will make it about who's got the money and what they want done with it over who doesn't and what they need to do every time. Every time. All right, in conclusion. The questions of social justice are around you all the time. You could read this week's readings or take a course in social justice and think of it as theory. I am here to tell you it's not. There's a strong theoretical underpinning to the things that we are discussing, but if you find yourself in a leadership role or as an advocate for a marginalized or vulnerable individual at any time in your career, you will be breathing social justice questions, and it behooves you as a result to understand the concepts as deeply as you possibly can. Don't fly ignorant, right? Don't practice ignorant, because these are all fundamental questions of social justice. In your profession, you have a sacred trust to care about this and to do something about it that they don't in the business schools, that they don't in the public policy schools, which is where I did my graduate work, that they kind of do in medical school. My husband and I debate this a lot. He's a doctor. But that you, as a school of social work, you signed up for this. So don't take it lightly. And lastly, hold social justice as core to who you are and what you do, and develop your own theory of justice over time. Right? There are a lot of principles available to us in conversations about social justice, and it is completely legitimate to prioritize different things. You might be utilitarian first and foremost. You might be redistributive, right? I like John Rawls, which I would bastardize as saying, you ought to be able to die and come back in society as anyone and be okay with it. That's the one I like. But decide which one you like. Decide which one speaks to you and makes the most sense. Have a framework for yourself on this, because it will make you so much more effective in your work. Does that make sense? Thank you for your time and your attention and your answers. I appreciate it.
So we'd like you to have a conversation at your tables. And this is the question we'd like to ask you to address. Think for a moment about your experiences working with vulnerable people, perhaps as a volunteer or as a staff member. Has there been a time when you have witnessed someone suffer unjustly because of a breakdown in the system of care? Now, this conversation is more than just a way to sort of talk about this important issue of justice. We also want your conversations to teach us what events we might plan for the upcoming year as we continue to talk about justice. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do at your tables is to find out who was born first, not who the oldest is. Only by month and day, who was born first? That person, please, write down what for you are the key points from your table discussion and give them to me at the end of the program so that we can then use your table wisdom in thinking about what we talk about next. So, you have your task. Enjoy it. I'll interrupt you in about 10 minutes for our second discussion. As soon as your table is ready, you can move to discussion question number 2, and this time it's the youngest person at the table who records the key themes or answers. Not the youngest by age, just by month and by day. All right? So the youngest person, if you wouldn't mind taking notes on this second question.